The explosive strategy of the Ukrainian armed forces that the Kremlin is keeping silent about. Ukrainian aviation and drones are striking ever deeper into the enemy's rear. Bases, warehouses, and energy facilities are burning. The Ukrainian armed forces warn Russia is facing a winter blackout. What are our defenders preparing, and why could these strikes paralyze all of Russia? Shocking details in the report.
Military facilities, energy, and the oil industry, the war has finally shifted onto Russian territory, and the Ukrainian armed forces seem to have chosen their targets in the occupiers' rear and are ramping up long-range strikes. One of the main goals is to force Russia to end the war, to make the cost of this war higher for Russia, so that there is more motivation to end it. At the same time, the defense forces are giving the Russians even more motivation every single day. Over the past few weeks, not a single night has passed in Russia without something exploding, catching fire, or being destroyed. We've gathered the most high-profile incidents. Undoubtedly, the most striking event in terms of Russian blackouts was the Ukrainian armed forces attack on the Moscow region on the night of November 1st. Monitoring channels reported hundreds of drones that flew out to bomb Russia, and they hit their targets. Even though Moscow's power grid held up, entire settlements around the capital were left without electricity. In particular, the Moscow region and the city of Zhukovsky were left in the dark.
Ukraine's armed forces have carried out many strikes on stations and substations, causing electricity and heating outages in Russian cities and occupied areas. Ukraine is targeting Russian energy infrastructure in response to Russia's attacks on Ukraine's power facilities. I believe that in December this retaliatory campaign will reach a new level, with the use of Flamingo missiles almost on a daily basis.
The campaign to destroy Russia's oil industry is also ongoing. In particular, the recent strikes on the Russian oil terminal in Tuapse were especially effective.
The attack on the Tuapse seaport was quite large-scale and effective, as well as spectacular. Local residents began taking photos and recording videos of the attack. The beginning of this attack was also caught on video. Meanwhile, local emergency services issued their usual statement, asking people not to film the aftermath of the strikes. This helps the enemy.
However, what actually helps the Ukrainian armed forces is not the videos made by concerned Russians who, in the fourth year of the war, have suddenly discovered that it is happening right outside their windows, but rather intelligence data, including from Western sources, which makes such precise strikes possible.
As a result of the strike, according to the Russian side's own assessment, Ukrainian UAVs hit, respectively, such targets as the central overpass, which is the main hub, for the process of oil transfer, and accordingly, we are specifically talking about a strike on an oil tanker vessel that was in the process of being loaded at the time when the attack occurred.
At the same time, when possible, the Ukrainian armed forces managed to kill several birds with one stone with a single strike. That is, they destroy a facility that is extremely important for the Russian economy on the one hand, and on the other, they hit openly military targets.
The strike was carried out on an industrial giant of the Stavropol region, the Stavrolen petrochemical plant in the city of Budyonovsk. This is one of the largest producers of polyethylene, polypropylene, benzene, and other petrochemical components that are actively used in the military-industrial complex.
Analysts note that a strike was carried out there for the first time. By the way, the plant is located 700 kilometers from Ukraine, and the enterprise supplies raw materials both to the domestic market and for export. This means that this attack damages not only the military-industrial complex, but also Russia's export revenues. The defense forces are also operating against targets in the Russian Federation, in the occupied territories. A few days ago, the residents of Crimea felt this especially strongly after one of the largest attacks on the peninsula in recent months, particularly targeting oil depots in Vardiske and Sevastopol.
The outcome of this episode is as follows. In just 1 hour, 2 major oil facilities in Crimea were put out of operation. This means a complete loss of stability in the occupiers' rear supply lines in this sector, especially against the backdrop of the destruction and disabling of the largest oil terminal in Feodosia and the general gasoline shortage in Russia itself, which, I remind you, is the only source for replenishing Crimea's oil depots.
Most recently, on the night of November 4th, drones and Storm Shadow missiles launched by the defense forces managed to damage both Russian energy infrastructure and oil depots, and also significantly complicated their presence in the occupied territories by effectively disabling all military facilities within the strike zone.
Ukrainian drones struck thermal power plants and substations in Luhansk, Alkevsk, Kharivka, and Pervomaisk. These are temporarily occupied territories of Luhansk region. There have been reports of widespread power outages for consumers, blockades on the territory of the Russian Federation over the past day, drone strikes by the Ukrainian Defense Forces. Kursk region, this is Zheleznogorsk at the substation. The city is completely without power. Lipetsk region, this is the PSS traction substation. Usman, and accordingly, the city of Orel. A strike was carried out on the Oral CHP, Combined Heat and Power Plant. That's what concerns the blackout.
As for military targets, analysts call one of the most successful long-range attacks by the Ukrainian armed forces the explosions at the dam near Belgorod. The strike was so precise that no civilians were harmed. However, Russian units in the Kharkiv region were cut off from their own forces due to the flooding, and the offensive failed.
An important objective is to strike at Russia's logistical capabilities, at ammunition depots, airfields, aircraft, and troop concentrations in order to create difficulties for Moscow's war machine. To strike at the centers from which Russia directs operations at the front and from which it can attack Ukraine's strategic infrastructure, including its energy sector.
At the same time, it's far too early for Russians to relax, as announced by the head of the drone systems forces, Madya. This winter, Russian citizens will find out what a blackout is, and at the same time he reminded that gas and oil burn perfectly well, clearly hinting at new attacks on oil refineries.
As of November, according to estimates from the Russian side itself, about 40% of oil refineries on the territory of the Russian Federation have already been put out of operation.
Well, as they say, to be continued.
A global sensation. Trump has done the impossible. Xi Jinping is making concessions. China is turning away from Putin. The deal of the century is shaking between Washington and Beijing. Secret negotiations, hidden agreements, and possibly a global turning point in the war. What is this? A new world order or a political knockout for the Kremlin? All the shocking details. Coming up next, a truce or the calm before the storm. China has announced the suspension of an additional 24% tariff on American goods. The relief will last for a year. At the same time, the basic 10% tariff, which was introduced in response to a similar tariff by Trump announced in April, remains in place.
The US is the largest market for goods, and China is the largest producer of goods. How does China make money? By supplying its products to the biggest markets. And as we've noted, the US is the main one.
The decision on the new agreement was made after a meeting between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, Reuters reports. Thanks to this, tariffs of up to 15% on certain types of agricultural products from the US have also been lifted.
From an economic standpoint, China and the US cannot be in different, let's say, not exactly camps, but they can't be adversaries. In fact, they are in opposing camps, since they're competing over which of them is the leading economy.
China's Ministry of Finance noted that they will suspend all tariffs from March 4th on soybeans and other US agricultural products, including corn, wheat, sorghum, and chicken. It was stated that the decision was made in accordance with the consensus reached during economic and trade consultations between China and the US.
Therefore, despite all the political ambitions and attempts to show that we can compete, that we will be leaders and so on, I emphasize from the perspective of China's economic interests, it needs the US.
The US and China have also agreed to establish a direct line of communication between their armed forces. As stated by Pentagon Chief Pete Hegseth, this will help prevent potential conflicts between the countries. Another step China has taken towards the US is its refusal to import Russian oil. According to Bloomberg, major state-owned companies and smaller private enterprises in China have canceled nearly half of their oil shipments from Russia following the US sanctions against Rosneft and Lukoil in October.
When the question arises of whom China will choose, Russia or the US, one simple thing must be understood. There is the US, and its largest state is California. And California's economy is twice the size of Russia's economy. A single state in the United States of America has an economy equal to 2 Russian federations. Naturally, for China, the US is far more important than Russia.
Putin absolutely does not want to let go of one of his few remaining partners. That's why he sent his prime minister with greetings to Beijing. As a result of the negotiations, the parties signed about 10 documents on cooperation in the fields of energy, space, and high technology.
Russia is of interest to China as a supplier of raw materials, as a supplier of goods. Russia doesn't really have much choice except to sell everything to China. China understands that Russia depends on it and that Russia won't take any steps against it. And with America, it's interesting because that's a sales market.
According to Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service, Russia is sinking ever deeper into economic dependence on China. Raw material projects in the Far East and Siberia are turning the region into a resource base for China. Meanwhile, local communities are left out of the promised benefits. A scandal in Russia. The Russian Orthodox Church has blamed women for all the country's troubles. Unbelievable things are being said on federal TV channels. Women are being called serial killers and blamed for all disasters. Meanwhile, Solovyov had another hysterical outburst live on air. What pushed him over the edge and what secrets came to light afterwards? Watch this.
The past week in Russia once again proved that there is no bottom to how low things can go. From church advice to hide infidelity and give birth after assault, to deputies' confessions of propagandists' fantasies and collecting money after rejoicing at others' misfortunes, a unique form of madness has taken hold in the country. I
don't know what you people are sniffing over there, but at least try to exhale once in a while. But your lies are so laughable and vulgar that, well...
Just imagine, in Russia there's now a new way to strengthen the institution of the family by keeping silent.
Well, a person should behave reasonably and thoughtfully here, because being honest does not mean you have to announce to everyone on every corner what happened to you.
Metropolitan Rostislav suggested not acknowledging marital infidelity, but simply confessing it during confession. According to the clergyman, this way you can preserve the marriage without destroying it with the truth.
It is much more important
to cleanse your conscience in the sacrament of confession, and to come to confession to repent of this sin.
The Russian Orthodox Church once again reminded women of their place, next to their husband, preferably not straying too far. Priest Andrei Strutsky stated that a woman without a man is like a leaf blown here and there. After all, according to him, she needs support and guidance so as not to lose her way.
That is, without a man, a woman is carried about like a leaf, because she is meant to be part of a man. She cannot exist on her own.
Meanwhile, deputies in the Sverdlovsk region continue to surprise with new ideas about women's bodies. This time, People's Deputy Vyacheslav Vegner suggested not having abortions even after rape, but instead giving birth to the child and putting them up for adoption. This
is a living life, and today others are in need of this living life. There are many childless couples who cannot have a baby, and I think that maybe here we should be doing different work, but this child can live in another family. Life must be preserved. If it has begun, then it was convenient for the Lord.
And in Ryazan, sermons about morality are once again being heard. Bishop Peterim reported that after restrictions on abortions, the official statistics have decreased, but there is one but.
But now women are not giving birth. Women are refusing to give birth. But now, thank God, the leadership of our country has become concerned with this issue. And now the number of abortions is being limited. But there is another shadow statistic that no one is counting. Now women have started coming at night and having abortions that are recorded. Night abortions, night miscarriages, night cleanings, call it whatever you want. And
as usual, of course, the women are to blame. The clergyman did not mince words, calling them serial killers and blaming them for all the country's troubles.
And this doctor who performs the abortion, he's an executioner who doesn't just have his hands covered in blood, he's drenched in it. He's soaked in blood up to the very top of his head, this executioner. And these women, they're serial killers.
In addition, Solovyov reported that captured Ukrainian soldiers allegedly say they are not fighting for their country, but because the authorities have taken their families hostage. The story is, to put it mildly, impressive.
And when they're captured and spoken to, they say, "How can we surrender? They've taken our families hostage." These are men from Russian-speaking regions of Ukraine. They say, God forbid if they find out we surrendered ourselves, they're our own people. They say they're capable of such things. That's why we can't do it. That's
all for now. For more breaking news from the front, tune in to our next episode. Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.